I wanted to welcome everyone here to today's event, Climate Action and Green Competitiveness. My name is Jonathan Cooney, and I'm the co-lead for Green Competitiveness at the Trading Competitiveness Global Practice here at the World Bank. We're very pleased to see you all here. We know that this is a busy time for everyone, especially those involved in climate change with the run-up to the COP21 in Paris starting at the end of November and going into December. So it's great to see you all here. Also wanted to note that this event is being live streamed, and I've heard we just have about 125 additional people checking out the event remotely. So it's good to be able to use technology to connect in a way that's very climate friendly. So we very much welcome the folks checking this out online. Before we begin the proceedings, just a few housekeeping notes. One is that you may have noticed that we did not print out agendas or conference packets here, and that's done in the spirit of conservation and efficiency, and of course that's also climate friendly. The agenda is available. You can access it from the events page on your phone. You can access it. We'll have it up also on some of these screens. So you have the agenda there and also the bios. I also wanted to note that we will be making available some notepads on the tables if you wish to ask any questions of the speakers, and we do very much encourage interaction. We'll have microphones, we'll have the note cards, and please, for those of you online, there's a way to ask questions, and we will make sure that we prioritize those questions. And when you do participate, we hope to have a participatory event. We encourage you to do so in a way that is frank and open and honest and transparent, and perhaps even challenging some of the speakers up here. We think we've got a very exciting topic. We want to get everyone together to talk about this. We want to get frank and open views. So please, please be honest and frank in your interventions. Great. We're going to start with a couple of opening remarks and then move into the keynote session. Our first speaker to provide opening remarks will be Anabel Gonzalez, who as Senior Director of the Trade and Competitiveness Global Practice is the host for the event today. Anabel assumed this position last July 24th, of Senior Director of Trade and Competitiveness, before which she served as the Minister of Trade in Costa Rica, where she led efforts to have Costa Rica join the OECD, and also implemented 6 major trade agreements for Costa Rica when she was the trade minister there, and was a driving force to implement policies that led to investments of over 140 companies in Costa Rica. Anabel, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jonathan, and good morning to all of you, and thank you very much for being here. I'm very pleased to welcome all of you, and in particular our partners who are here today to share their experience and their expertise with us. A warm welcome to the Finnish Ambassador to the United States, Ms. Kirsti Kauppi. Also to the President and CEO of the World Resources Institute, Andrew Steele, who is, of course, familiar to many of you here at the World Bank Group. Mr. Hakan Bulgurlu, the CEO of Arçelik from Turkey, thank you very much for being with us. And Ms. Mari Pansar, Director of the Finnish Innovation Agency, Sitra, also thank you for being with us. I also want to welcome our World Bank Group colleagues, and in particular from the Climate Group, Mr. James Close, the Energy and Environment Global Practices, and the IFC, who are participating and sharing their experience with us. As we all know, climate change has gone from an uncertain computer projection to a physical reality. We've already seen a 1 degree centigrade rise in global temperatures since the start of the industrial age. And although 2015 is not over yet, scientists are confidently predicting that it will be the warmest year ever recorded. These alarming trends disproportionately threaten developing countries, especially the poor and disenfranchised in those countries who are least able to respond and adapt. President Kim has thus prioritized climate change as a major issue threatening to roll back decades of progress on economic development. So today's event is organized to examine how industry in developing countries can respond to climate change and the steps taken to address climate change to maintain and even enhance competitiveness at the country, sector, and firm levels. We wish to understand better how is it that our clients can minimize harm to existing industries and capture opportunities that are arising. Climate change and related actions may well represent the greatest economic transformation of our time. Firstly, all existing industries, every single one of them, will see their established practices threatened by changes in the weather, forcing a rethinking and shift in operating principles and strategies. We're also going to see massive new investments. One study undertaken in our Trade and Competitiveness Global Practice showed that over the next decade, there will be $6.4 trillion invested in climate-related sectors in developing countries alone. From a private sector point of view, this figure is very attractive and something, of course, that you, those who are in business, would want to be part of. We will also see a rapid expansion of relatively nascent markets. The growth rates in sectors such as renewable energy, sustainable agriculture, and clean water are projected to continue at high, often exponential levels, which creates, again, many opportunities. And finally, we will continue to see technological disruption. The many new clean technologies are being developed and applied in innovative ways, which promises to transform numerous sectors and trading partners. Now, countries and companies that proactively seize opportunities presented by the expanding new markets and technology will likely see pronounced growth and development. Those who not may see their industries and economic fortunes fail. So there is a window of opportunity now to take the steps needed in this regard. And I particularly note the importance of this issue again for developing countries. They are the ones most exposed to climate threats, but also in a way, the best positioned to enhance their own competitiveness in these changing times. In a world marked by transformation, new and non-traditional players have the best chances to improve their position and benefit from these changes. At our practice, the Trade and Competitiveness Global Practice, we are keen to work with all of you, and especially with our clients, to address these issues head-on in a way that improves their competitiveness and economic standing. We have made green competitiveness one of our major cross-cutting themes for the GP and are looking to enhance our offering in this area. Already, our climate technology program and climate efficient industries program are helping dozens of countries increase industry efficiency and innovate new businesses in growing markets. We believe our skills and experience in the practice as a whole are very relevant, very well suited to expand on this for more help to clients. This includes expertise in trade and global value chains, sector and industrial competitiveness, and innovation and entrepreneurship. We all hope and believe that negotiators in Paris will produce a strong agreement in the COP21 next month. When that happens, we stand ready to help developing countries to successfully manage the impacts they will experience on the competitiveness of their industries. This will be a major endeavor, and we very much welcome your participation and share expertise today to develop a cogent plan to go forward together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Annabelle. Second in our opening remarks to welcome us will be the Finnish ambassador to the United States, Kirsti Kauppi. Ambassador Kauppi was appointed ambassador just several months ago and started this job in September, so welcome to Washington, Ambassador. Prior to that, she served as Finnish ambassador in Vienna and also has experience in diplomatic posts in Berlin and Bangkok. We're particularly happy to have the Finnish ambassador here because of the participation of our colleagues from CITRA, the Finnish Innovation Agency, who you will see later on. So, Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. It's a true pleasure to be here today because I cannot think of a more important issue to talk about. I would like to offer some thoughts about how the thinking on climate action and economy has evolved and why it is important that this has happened. Traditionally, the relationship between emissions and economy has been considered pretty straightforward. If you want your economy to grow, your emissions will go up. And if you want to tackle climate change, you will have to settle with slower growth. This is not a very appealing proposition for politicians especially. However, this conventional wisdom has changed over the past years. It started with the seminal Stern report. Formerly, with the World Bank, economist Nicholas Stern was the first to really break the news that while reducing emissions does come with a price tag, business as usual actually is much more expensive. Tackling climate change is therefore a smart move, not only from the point of view of environment, but also from the point of view of our economy. The next revelation was that just looking at the price of climate change and actions to mitigate it would be missing a key part in the puzzle. Very often, measures to reduce greenhouse gas emissions also provide multiple other benefits. For instance, if we replace kerosene lamps with solar panels, obviously we can cut harmful air pollution and improve people's health. Similarly, if we invest in public transport, we reduce congestion and increase mobility. Investing in renewable and clean energy also creates thousands of jobs in this sector. So taking all these co-benefits into account can change the equation completely. What has been a net cost turns into a net benefit. An issue that is often discussed is the subsidies for fossil fuels. Several studies have illustrated the amounts of taxpayers' money flowing into fossil fuel subsidies. The IEA estimates the global direct subsidies to be more than $500 billion every year. The IMF has come up with an even more staggering figure, $4.2 trillion every year. Now, there are understandable reasons for the subsidies, not least helping low-income families. But cutting harmful subsidies would reduce emissions and also grow the economy at the same time. Going back to how the thinking has evolved, the most recent debate has started challenging the notion that reducing emissions actually has to have a net cost. Several studies just suggest that by choosing smart solutions and implementing them wisely, we can achieve significant emissions reductions with no net costs. The most famous example is the landmark New Climate Economy report. The report suggests that investing in a low-carbon economy may cost almost as much, in other words, hardly any more, than continuing business as usual when taking savings into account. Later today, we will hear about a brand new analysis by the Finnish Innovation Fund, Sitra, and its international partners from 10 different countries, including ICF and World Resources Institute. I think this is a very interesting study. So to sum up how this shifting paradigm has happened and what it means. The debate on climate action and economy and their relationship has evolved in an important manner. The paradigm is shifting. We are on the verge of a new understanding of this relationship. If we start seeing climate action more as an opportunity rather than a burden, prospects for progress at the decisive UN climate conference in Paris and beyond will be remarkably brighter. So I thank you for your attention and wish you a very, very useful discussion today on, as I said, the most important topic I think we have on our agendas. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I'd now like to welcome to the stage my colleague Alexios Pantelius, who will be the moderator for the keynote exchange, which we'll have right now. And those individuals in the keynote exchange, Dr. Andrew Steele, our colleague from Arçelik, and James Close from the Climate CCSA.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Please, if I may ask our panelists to come on the stage. Please. First of all, I would like to thank our panelists for their kind acceptance of this invitation. The objective of this event, as we have already mentioned, is to talk about climate change and its effect on competitiveness of countries, industries, and companies. Before we start, I would like to say a few more words about our panelists. Dr. Andrew Steele is the president and CEO of the World Resources Institute, a global research organization, as we all know, that works in more than 50 countries, with offices in the US, China, India, Brazil, Indonesia, and Europe. WRI's 450 experts work closely with leaders to address 6 urgent global challenges and the intersection of economic development and the natural environment, which is climate, energy, food, forests, water, and cities. So welcome, Andrew. Mr. Hakan Bulgurlu is the CEO of Arçelik Group, a subsidiary of Koç Holding, having operations in durable consumer goods industry, offering products and services around the world with its 25,000 employees. And we have James Close, who is a director in the climate change group of the World Bank. His team is responsible for climate policy, knowledge and partnerships, the Global Facility for Disaster Recovery and Resilience, and the World Bank's group's involvement in several climate funds. So with this short introduction, and unfortunately, Rachel Kite's supposed to be in the panel today, but unfortunately she couldn't make it. So with this introduction, I would like to start with a few questions, and then we will open it to the audience, the people that are here and online, to ask challenging questions to our panelists. So as we heard before, in a few days, COP21 is going to take place in Paris. Countries are committing to reducing greenhouse gas emissions via their national allocation plans. So we are talking about INDCs, carbon pricing. We are talking about fossil fuel subsidies, as the ambassador mentioned before. So Andrew, maybe I can start with you, and then Hakan and James can follow on the same question. So which actors will gain in competitiveness and which will lose as the result of the climate change developments? Andrew?
Well, there's certainly, well, first, it's great to be here. Thank you, Alexis. And I love what the World Bank Group is doing here, which is linking issues of climate to issues of competitiveness. Because if we're going to get the changes we require, we need to get precisely the ministers of trade and industry, the leaders of corporations, and so on to engage. So I really admire what you're doing, and I know you're on a journey, and it's a real joy for me to come back and see sort of where you are now. It was just, I guess, 3 years ago, Jonathan, when we were sitting in Nairobi with the Danish ambassador and the Brits and the minister from Kenya, and saying, look, why don't we start one of these climate innovation centers? Well, it's now been up and running for 2 years. It's already supported 100 companies. Same too in Vietnam. We went out there, and now you're opening that next month. And I think you've got like 7 centers around the world, and what you're doing, Alexis, too. So it is absolutely right, the kind of the intersection that you've chosen. Look, the Finnish ambassador made exactly the right point, that we now know that if we get a strong deal in Paris, the world economy will become healthier. So civilization as a whole will become better off. Economies will perform better. And we could talk about that a little later if you like. But that doesn't mean that everyone's a winner. There are going to be losers. And the losers are going to be those who don't see change coming. And that's the history of economics, isn't it? That's the history of capitalism. And almost all economic form is that if you can't anticipate, if you can't be nimble, you are going to die. My great-grandfather was a sheep farmer in the Outer Hebrides of Scotland. He actually saw that refrigeration would bring sheep from New Zealand and Australia, so he got out. But a lot didn't. You know, they were flat-footed, and actually, for 50 years then, you had a sort of massive sort of recession in that industry. So who's going to lose? 2 losers, those that don't anticipate the impacts of climate change, and those who don't anticipate the impacts of action against climate change. They are both going to lose. So if you don't figure out, as many companies now are figuring out, that what's going to happen to water, what's going to happen to extreme weather events, what's going to happen to temperature, what's going to happen to shifts in hydrological cycles, and so on, if you don't figure that out, and you're in an industry that actually depends on that not happening in order to thrive, you are going to suffer. So too, if you don't read the writing on the wall, and you'd be nuts now not to read the writing on the wall, if you don't figure out that in the next 10 years there's going to be a serious price on carbon, which there will be, you are going to suffer as well. And if you don't actually, in your own country, look through and think, wait a minute, this is how this is how our government's going to approach it. They're going to use a cap and trade. They're going to use a regulatory system. The supply chain is going to drive my markets in a different place because I'm not taking attention as to what my carbon emissions are, so I'm going to lose. But at the same time, there are massive opportunities, and I think that's what you guys are focusing on. So for every company that suffers, there will be 2 or 3 companies that actually see this wonderful opportunity. It's like a football game, you know, where the running back stands behind this line and there's absolutely no way forward. And then suddenly the ball snaps and suddenly there's a little opening and you grab it. And that seems to me that's exactly what you're trying to do, is to build that capacity to anticipate where that gap is and then allow a rapid acceleration through it.
Alexios, thank you for having me here. It's a great opportunity to speak on such an important topic. But I'll start by apologizing, Andrew. I didn't realize refrigerators disrupted your grandfather's business. Will there be winners and losers? There clearly will be winners and losers. And the winners will be companies that adopt sustainability as a way of life as opposed to a nice word to have or a nice to have. There's a lot of meaning behind it, and I think I'll try and explain what I mean later on. But in the most immediate sense, climate change will bring about great fluctuations in the price of commodities, resources, especially resources like food, clean air, water. Companies that have sustainability at heart and have built-in systems will be able to weather these a lot better. But I mean, you can look at very simple aspects. If you were to ask the Y generation, people born, 80s, 90s, what kind of company they'd like to work for, the smartest ones will tell you they want to work for a green company that has a future, because even they can see that the ones that actually are being active and building this into all of their business processes are going to be the winners, and they'd much rather work for companies like that. I think there are so many factors. I'm not going to start listing all of them, but I think governments increasingly will take regulation and climate change into consideration. In the developing economies especially, regulations will change frequently, abruptly. In the developed world, they'll become much more stringent and hard to follow. And only companies who are on the leading edge of sustainability and innovate consistently, both in terms of their services and products, to make their, in our case, to make our products much more energy efficient, water efficient. There are many other aspects, I mean, which I'll get into later again. I think the winners and losers will be quite clear, and they will differentiate early on. I'm very excited about the COP21 because I think 120 global leaders getting together is an amazing start and an amazing builder of awareness, which is what we need. Most businesses today think of sustainability as a cost. They think they have to invest, and actually, without getting engagement of stakeholders like employees, customers, it's very, very difficult to get it moving. Business needs to see sustainability as a profit driver, as a differentiator in terms of building a competitive advantage in the future. So yes, I think winners and losers will be very clearly differentiated.
I mean, I agree, obviously, but I think I was fortunate enough to be here earlier in the week for the annual World Bank Group Youth Summit, and the topic of the annual World Bank Group Youth Summit was climate change. And I started off with a question to the audience around how these young people felt about climate change, and asked them to define their overriding emotion around it. And I thought that there would be a lot of people who were really rather angry or nervous about it, but the majority were actually very excited about the opportunities associated with climate change. Later on, we had several of these young people coming and presenting their ideas around businesses associated with climate change and how to respond to the opportunity. And these were fantastic ideas and showed real innovation and entrepreneurship, some way beyond the Generation Y like myself and the view of what the future might hold. But no doubt going to shape the future of the world. And I think, so in one regard, the young people are the people who are going to have to deal with this most of all, but they're actually the ones who are better equipped for this. And I think their entrepreneurial spirit is going to be a great asset. The second thing I'd say is you started off, Alexios, talking about the INDCs. And the INDCs are the most significant investment plan that many countries are going to have, and that presents enormous opportunity for investors in those countries. I think the Indian INDC outlines over $2.5 trillion of investment over the next 10 or 15 years. So I think for businesses to look at those investment plans and say how they can participate in the decarbonization of each of those individual countries, and then what that means to decarbonizing the global economy, becomes a very exciting way to force the innovation and to think about the new solutions that might arise as a result of the response to climate change.
I think I see a consensus, right, in terms of the winners and losers. Now, how real are the trade-offs between climate change action and economic growth, right? And can governments and the private sector quantify the climate change risks and justify the necessary investments in the cleaner technologies and sustainability, as you mentioned, and the more resilient infrastructure? Does the private sector and the public sector have the data, the information to quantify the risk to be able to make the necessary investments for this? So maybe I can start with Hakan, Andrew, and James.
With that, quantifying this kind of risk is obviously very, very difficult. But You know, I grew up listening to climate change as an abstract subject that might affect my grandchildren. Today, I am affected by climate change, and I think increasingly, I am not sure how severely my children or their grandchildren will be affected. So the discussion has gone, if we look at the rise of water level, for example, now the argument between scientists is whether it'll raise by 1 meter or 30 meters in 100 years. Even if it just raises by 1 meter, that means 300 million displaced people. I mean, look at how Europe is dealing with 1 million refugees, or Turkey with 2.5 million refugees today. Imagine 300 million people moving around. The disruption will be tremendous. So in terms of quantifying the effects on the economy, I don't think it's possible. I don't think anyone really realizes how dangerous it is. So we all have to do whatever we can. Citibank made a very credible effort on trying to quantify and put numbers on it. If I remember correctly, 1 degree raise roughly translates to 22 trillion in terms of total global GDP, billion, sorry. And then 2 degree, 70 billion, 3 degree, 90 billion reduction in global GDP. These are big numbers. I think what needs to happen is the private sector needs to really change the business model in how we operate. We need to create much more liquid financial markets in developing economies where financing becomes available for greener technologies, but in a for-profit way, driven by markets. There was a great article by Henry Paulson on the subject a few days ago. From my appliance business's perspective, the park for refrigerators in the world by 2030 is predicted to grow by 70% in the developing world, where regulations don't dictate these are energy efficient appliances. If we manage to make sure that these are energy efficient appliances, the total energy consumption globally can be reduced by 10%. This is a huge number. This would also mean 350 billion in savings just to consumers in electricity bills. So the numbers are absolutely huge. The math is there. The incentive is there for business to innovate. It's just a matter of really working very closely with governments, not to regulate everything, but to better enforce existing regulations and make sure that the right ones are in place in the right geographies. I hope that answers a little bit.
Very much so. Andrew?
Look, we know that climate change is going to hurt economic growth. What we didn't know is the extent to which strong climate action would affect economic growth. And as Ambassador Kalpi said, we actually, there is now sort of a huge clarity that's come, partly as a result of the Global Commission on the Economy and Climate, when we actually had the privilege of being asked to set it up, and we were the managing partners. But we made it very clear that those who were, that were actually doing the work were not environmentalists. So we set up a global commission headed by Felipe Calderon, the ex-president of Mexico, but finance ministers and so on. So for example, here from the World Bank, it was Sri Mulyani and Drupati, not environmentalists. And so CEOs of corporations, they were the ones that were on it. And then we set up an economics panel, not environmental economists, apart from Nick Stern, who chaired it. Otherwise, Nobel Prize winners like Michael Spence, Danny Kahneman, a range of the leading growth players in the world. Danny Roderick, for example, on it, not environmentalists. So we asked them, we looked at two questions. One, will it cost more to go this way towards a green future than this way towards a polluting future? And that's where the 90 trillion came from. We looked at the investment over 15 years in infrastructure across the world, $90 trillion. We then looked in great detail about where it would cost more, energy efficiency, another $6 trillion, renewable energy, another $2 trillion. Then we looked at the savings, a whole bunch of savings, including designing cities in a way that would save $3 trillion and so on. Turns out that instead of 90 trillion, it was 91 trillion. Then the question is, but we haven't actually then looked at the savings, which come in the form of the fact we don't need to buy coal anymore, we don't need to buy gas anymore, because we're getting renewable energy. You then save another 3. So actually, in net present value terms, you save another. So in other words, it's cheaper. So that was question number 1. But question number 2 is more tricky, which is, okay, fine, what's it going to do to economic growth? And we approached it not from climate change, but from what you would want to do if you really wanted more economic growth. Imagine you're on the G20 and you've got this really unimpressive world economy right now. The question is, what do you need to do to get growth? We know from economic theory and economic practice, you need a boost in technology, you need greater efficiency of resource use, and you need policies that are consistent and predictable. So what does smart climate change policies do? They force new technology, and we know a lot about that now. That will boost growth. They actually are all about doing things we should have done all the time, like removing energy subsidies and so on, which encourage, exactly the way Hakan was saying, they encourage sort of more economic efficiency, that boosts it. And then it turns out that actually investment in the world at the moment is being delayed, big investments, because big investors actually don't know which way the wind's going to be blowing on climate change. So if you do really technical analysis on all of that, you actually see that you'll have more growth, not less growth. Now, having said that, there still will be losers, but the winners will more than compensate, and you will, done right. Now, there are good ways of addressing climate change and bad ways of addressing climate change. The good ways will lead to more, not less economic growth.
James?
I can't help but think of I was looking at some sort of old photographs the other day, and there's a wonderful picture of Easter Sunday in New York on Fifth Avenue with horses and carriages right down the road, taken in 1900. By 1915, on the same Easter Sunday, not one horse and carriage to be seen, all cars. So over 15 years, the horse and carriage have been replaced by the car. And of course, that coincided with a period of significant economic growth for the global economy, and obviously New York was at the forefront of much of that. But if you take that kind of cycle of innovation and you apply it to some of the things that we're talking about here, you can start to imagine how the world will be very, very different. And you start to think about the transition that companies need to make in order to respond to that. I think we now know, we have a huge amount of data around what the weather patterns are going to be. Some of it, I think, Andrew, you probably commissioned the Turn Down the Heat series that the World Bank did 3 or 4 years ago, still one of the most influential data sets around changing climates. And I think Hakan made an excellent point around adaptation as well. So we also know that as we move to a 2-degree world and potentially beyond, a quarter of the world are going to live in water-constrained circumstances. So what opportunities does that present? And from an adaptation perspective, and how do we use some of the concessional finance that's going to have to flow to enable that to be supported, to trigger and catalyze the private sector capital that will come behind it? And I think the really important point about that is, as we sit on huge amounts of savings in the developed world that are yielding relatively small sums of money because of they're invested in long-term gilts and government bonds, how do we make that capital more productive in employing it in circumstances where developing countries can grow as a result of that type of investment? But how do we do it in a way that we manage the risk-reward trade-off and the long-term investment cycle associated with that? Now, that's the sort of work that we at the bank are thinking about in terms of building creditworthiness in many of these developing economies, and creating the conditions then for investment to come forward and to put the money into those infrastructure changes that are going to be required in the future.
And we have seen that many of these actions are at a very high level, where governments, the public sector plays a very significant role. Do you feel that the private sector has enough voice in the process? Do you feel, and especially the private sector from developing economies or rising economies? And maybe I can start with you,
I think I'll take that question. Coming from a developing economy, yeah. The answer is probably no. There definitely needs to be more. I sit on the steering committee of CESED, which is the European Council for Household Appliances. And a lot of the work we do is trying to build in smarter regulation and enforcement of that regulation, circular economy, recyclability, and definitely energy labeling, which is very important. But I think companies like Arçelik can set an example in terms of actually how they behave and how they enhance their competitiveness. I think a good example would be our acquisition of DeFi in South Africa in 2011. Many of you know that in South Africa today, unfortunately, there are rollout energy cuts because they don't have enough power invested over the past 20 years. When we bought the company, all the products were DE energy level, which is very low. There's no regulation that dictated a higher level product. Over the past 4 years, we've invested in production technology and product. Today, they're all AA+. And of course, as a result of that, yes, it did take a lot of investment in terms of human capital and capital financing. And the type of finance you're talking about, James, that needs to flow to companies like us, I think, to make it possible. And today, the net result is all the appliances we produced in 2011. If we say they consumed 100 units of energy, all the appliances we produced in 2014 would have consumed 52 units of energy. That is a very drastic change in a country that needs energy. So this type of, and by the way, we're market leaders, so it does make a big difference. I think we have 40% market share there. Not advertising for Arçelik, but what we need to do is drive this kind of innovative growth and sustainability-dependent business model further north to sub-Saharan Africa, to other countries where energy is obviously very scarce. Another example for Africa, we've produced refrigerators which work with solar energy. This is really important because we tend to think of resource efficiency as energy and water only, but food is a great resource. And extending, the life of food by 20, 30 days is a very big deal. So I do think there's a lot more that private sector can do from developing economies. I think it will come. The awareness is definitely there. And I think businesses are slowly realizing that if they adapt sustainability as a business model, they gain a competitive advantage over the long term. Now, Arçelik's advantage is we're part of the Koç Group, and they take a very long-term view, so they allow us to invest. We're not like an American company. Yes, we do follow our share price quarterly basis, but that's not the key driver. The key driver is sustainability over the long term. I think that's an important aspect. If companies realize that and they're able to raise competitive financing on the back of that, with reasonable country risk premiums, as you were mentioning, I think we will see this process accelerating.
I think it's a really interesting question. I mean, I wonder if we've framed it quite the right way, because if you look at some of the leading global companies, they're actually working with the supply chains in developing companies in a really productive way, and that's where you get developed countries and companies and developing countries really kind of coming together. And I'll give you an example of this in Côte d'Ivoire. Côte d'Ivoire is actually really vulnerable to deforestation. The rate of that had been very, very high, and the government had realized that it needed to reintroduce cocoa as a major export crop. And it's now 30% of exports and 10% of GDP. And it's done that partly as a result of a partnership with Mondelez, the agribusiness, which has actually trained over 800,000 farmers and smallholders in Côte d'Ivoire to develop sustainable cocoa. So I think that's where you get the benefits of the developed or global companies coming in and working with developing countries and their supply chains in a way that's really symbiotic in terms of the benefits that provides. And I think, if we can think about what that means in terms of catalyzing opportunity and entrepreneurship, we can really make a big step forward around the opportunities that climate change presents.
Look, I think the Paris Agreement will be much, much stronger than it would have been had it not been for the private sector. I mean, I think it's a real, there aren't enough people like Hakan yet, but there's a growing number. And I think your impact is much, much greater than it used to be. I think you probably all know how they're organizing the Paris conference. There's really 4 pillars, as you know. Pillar number 1 is what country pledges, that's so-called INDCs. Pillar number 2 is the legal agreement, which is really about how often will we re-look at the issue, what's the long-term goal, and so on. Third element is finance. And the fourth element, which is the most exciting of all, is called the action agenda. The reason the action agenda is there is because we know that the first 3 won't get us to where we need to get to onto a least cost path to a 2-degree world. So item number 4 is the action agenda, which is overwhelmingly led by 2 groups of people, private sector leaders and mayors of cities. And what they're saying is, look, there are coalitions out here that are much more ambitious, moving much more rapidly than many of the countries that have put in their pledges. And so whether it's on renewable energy or energy efficiency, whether it's on greening supply chains or whatever. I'll tell you one to my mind, the most exciting thing that's going on at the moment in the private sector is moving from doing better to doing enough. For the last 25 years, you know, every private sector company has stood up to say, oh, we're doing better on energy efficiency, we're doing better on climate change. And countries have said exactly the same, we're doing better. Well, good luck doing better, but we need to do enough to get to a 2-degree world. There's something called science-based targets, which a group of organizations, we, WWF, UN Compact, CDP, We Mean Business, are basically working with companies, and now 101 have signed on. 101 major international corporations have signed on to this, which says we are going to set our targets based on science so that would get to a 2-degree world. And quite honestly, of the 101, I think maybe 85 are from OECD countries. But for example, in India, companies like Wipro, for example, you know, 160,000 employees, 57 billion, you know, capitalization. They have said, count us in. We want to do that. In South Africa, companies like Tiger Brands, big food company, have said, we want to do that, as well as all of the ones you'd expect to, the Mars and the Unilevers and all the ones here. I hope your company is one of them. I think you are. Good. I wanted to talk to you about that afterwards. That's right. Yeah. And
you've got 102.
But you know what? You know what's incredible about this is that doing enough means using scope 3, by the way. So scope 1 is what we do in our own plant. Scope 2 is what do we do in our own plant plus what power we use. Scope 3 is my entire supply chain. So what's happening now is that, you know, companies, if they're going to do enough, they're going to be, which they're starting to already, sending out questionnaires to all of their supply chains. It's absolutely amazing. And so each of those, they're going to be losers there in the supply chain, because if you can't demonstrate actually you're not getting in the right place, the big company is not going to buy from you. We're starting to see that in a very, very exciting way.
Actually, the World Bank Group has similar projects that looks at the whole supply chain for things, and I think the climate change dimension needs to go into every global value chain project that we are looking at. It's an integral factor. If I can stay with you, Andrew, and WRI has been providing data and information in the space and to help us understand the opportunities and the challenges. What is the next frontier for you guys? What is the next set of analysis and data that you feel is WRI should contribute and lead?
I think the next 10 years are going to be incredibly exciting because of the new technologies that are coming available. 2 examples. Water, for example. 5 years ago, Goldman Sachs came to us together with GE and Shell, and they said, you know, we know that water has different values in different places around the world, and we know that some places are more risky, but we don't know how to measure it. Could you help us measure it? So we've probably spent in the last 4 years $8 million on a very sophisticated way of measuring water risk in 15,000 largest water basins in the world. And so we're now able to say, you know, what is the risk of drought, of flooding, of pollution, of all kinds of things, 12 indicators. What we're now able to do, just this year we just launched, say, which was what they really wanted, which is fine, that's good, and as a result of that, 250 companies, you know, from McDonald's to Anheuser-Busch through their whole supply chain, they're saying, we're dependent on water, we want to look at this, where are the hotspots and so on. But what we did this year is say, yeah, but it's going to change. So we use IPCC scenarios and economic growth projections and population projections. So for those same 15,000, you actually can then project 10, 20, 30, 40 years ahead, I mean, with varying degree of accuracy. So that when you then overlay that on, as the Chinese government has done, on its shale gas deposits, which need a lot of water, they realize they're much less energy secure than they want. So too, if you overlay it on irrigation in South Asia, you actually see all kinds of things. Now, here's the point, is that every year that passes, there are ways now of improving using technology. So, for example, using remote sensing now, we're just for the first time being able to get almost real-time data on water quality, and that then through all kinds of sophisticated algorithms can help you identify risk moving forward. Water is the way that climate change creates risk. It's the #1 way. So that's a very, very important way of doing it. Just one other example, you know, we do, as you know, with Google and others, and NASA, we run a program called Global Forest Watch, which for the first time ever, you're able to look anywhere in the world that has access to the internet can see deforestation and change in land use in real time. So it's updated every 3 weeks, as opposed to waiting 4 years from data from the FAO, which you had to do until last year. Now what you can do, which we're doing, is we're sitting in Singapore with palm oil purchasers, and we're mapping every single palm oil plantation, which we now have, every single oil mill. We're able to tell a Unilever or, more importantly, some of the Southeast Asian purchasers, like Wilmar, for example, who's now come on board. We're able to tell them, if you buy palm oil from this mill, you will have a 90% probability that it is honorably produced. But if you buy from this one, it's only a 30%, and we can show the whole thing using remote sensing and then on the ground. That's the kind of way in which, through the supply chain, as we move forward to what we were just talking about, which is, you know, I'll buy from my suppliers only if they are honorably enabling me to say I'm doing enough, that's going to transform.
Fantastic. And James, as a World Bank group, what do we think we should be doing more? Jim Kim mentioned that we are going to move from 10 billion per year on climate change-related lending to 16 billion. In your view, what do we need to do more as World Bank Group?
I think the other thing that we produced this week was the Climate and Poverty Report, and I think that shows the linkage between climate change and poverty, and we're in the business of eradicating poverty and creating shared prosperity. So, you know, we have to do this hand in hand with the kind of policies that are going to enable us to address climate change, but also make sure that we protect the poorest and the most vulnerable. And we know that if we don't address climate change, you know, up to 100 million people are going to fall back into poverty. So that's a really important driver of what we do as an institution. I think the other things that are really important for us as an economic institution are continuing to advocate for getting prices right. So fossil fuel subsidy reform is a very fundamental part of what we're doing, and working with countries that enable them to do that with the social safety nets that protect the poorest and the most vulnerable. And of course, working across the private sector and the public sector on getting a price for carbon and making sure that price for carbon is a realistic one that's going to enable the transformation of the global economy. So those are two things that can really change the price signals around what we're doing. I think the next thing is about how do we make finance flow. And you talked about what we do on our own account, which is obviously a very important part as we move up from, on average, 21% to 28% per year of investment. But also, how do we use some other funding out there that can be catalytic to enable us to then make large-scale investments? So if you look at the climate investment funds, the success that they've had around the Climate Technology Fund, you know, the question we're asking ourselves is, you know, what do you need now to enable that fund to scale up the private sector investment side of things? And how do we take the successes we've had, for example, with Project Noor in Morocco, and the learning that we've got around concentrated solar power and bringing in the private sector to those kind of projects and apply it at scale in other places? So I think that's the second thing, is getting the finance flowing. And then I think the third thing is creating the enabling environment. And I think that's where so much of the work that's done by colleagues in this room is really important, like the Climate Innovation Centres, which Andrew talked about. You know, what can we do at the beginning of the entrepreneurial cycle to get the best ideas scaling up as quickly as possible, and make sure we don't lose many of the great entrepreneurial innovations that fall away in the valley of death because either there isn't sufficient seed capital and venture capital to enable those to happen, or, you know, more importantly, that the basic business skills to turn an idea into a business just aren't there. And how do you get those basic business skills to apply, and what's the peer-to-peer learning that can come around that, which is a lot of the excellent work that's being done there. So I think those are three of the significant things that we can do. And I think the fourth thing I'd say is, don't forget adaptation. I mean, we haven't yet figured out quite how to get the private sector capital flowing into adaptation. But I think if we can send the demand signals that are going to be out there, we can start to get the big engineering firms to work on the innovative solutions that are going to address some of those things.
Actually, Hakan, James talked about innovation. You mentioned also that sustainability is in the core of Arçelik's business structure and thinking. I would like, and also that efficiency is a very important thing for you and for the products that you produce. I wanted to ask you, how do standards, energy efficiency standards, affect your business in terms of your business strategy, in terms of where you want to expand globally, and also in terms of innovation that James just mentioned?
It's a big question, but first I'll start by correcting a small thing. Sustainability is a way of life for us, but it's just the start of the journey. There's a long, long way to go. I mean, it would be too arrogant to say that we're good at it. We still have to really focus and keep investing on the concept. Having said that, I think in our business and industry, innovation is a key driver. We as Arçelik have more than 1,000 R&D engineers. We have collaborations with universities like Cambridge, like MIT labs in Boston, because all innovation cannot come inside. You need to have these collaborative environments. And through this innovation focus and R&D focus, we're able to produce appliances which are energy efficient, water efficient. A good example will be a dishwasher we produce that consumes only 5.5 liters of water. Now that may mean something to you, but a regular dishwasher, the one at your home, I'm sure consumes 15 liters or more. In a year, that's 2,600 liters. I don't know how many gallons that is, but it's a lot of water. Now, I probably need the data from Andrew's map to see where I can actually sell these things, because they don't sell well. I mean, it's only 1% of our sales, or 1.5% of our sales. It's a very new product. That doesn't really matter, because that product's out there. It drives competitors, first of all, to match it. I think the consumers are becoming more aware, so they're willing, slowly, not yet, to pay more for that kind of appliance. And I think the brand equity you build with the technology you bring is also equity. At the end of the day, it increases the value of your business. So to answer the regulatory part of your question, I think governments and regulatory agencies, when they see this kind of product out there, they're able to take that product and set it at the top end of the benchmark, which then forces the whole industry to comply. So I think the role of innovation is incredibly important. But this isn't the only, not only in terms of energy or water efficiency. Another area which is very important, I think, is connectivity, IoT, something that everybody's talking about all the time. But what it really means, I think, rather than people being interested in controlling their washing machine or dishwasher by a telephone, they're much more interested to know that their appliance is communicating with us, letting us know what the use cycles are, and we're able to remotely download algorithms which conserve your clothes, for example, which is also sustainability, because you don't have to go and buy more clothes for a longer period of time, or use less energy, less water, let us know when it's breaking down, improve the life cycle of the product. I think all of these build in to a new way of doing business, and I think it's for Arçelik, it's been very effective. Again, in terms of regulations, we actively collaborate with legislative bodies everywhere. We're part of every association I can think of, from the 2-degree Communique of 2011, the UN energy efficiency programs, there are multiple of them. We are part of the carbon declaration program. For the past 4 years, we've been the winner in our industry. I think all of these also add credibility to becoming a green company.
This is fascinating. At this point, I would like, if you allow me, to open it up to the audience. Maybe we can start with some questions. I guess we have 15 more minutes. We can start with some questions in the room, and then after that, we can see whether we have some questions from the colleagues that are online.
This is Arçelik from the IEA. Just wanted to first thank you for the very interesting discussion. I think it's very, very lively. I think when we're talking about the transition towards a 2 degrees environment and a 2 degrees world, I think most of the analysis of different organizations kind of align in the idea that we have to take and make the most of all the different resources that we have. So that would imply energy efficiency, that would imply implementing best available technologies, but also thinking about the future, how we could support currently better innovation, as you mentioned, so that we have the new technologies we'll need in place in the longer term to reach that additional emission reductions that we need. And in our discussions with the private sector, many times they basically tell us that one of the challenges they face is that they've got a limited budget that they need to let's say, invest, and they have to make decisions on whether they could provide more of that investment to allocate it to, let's say, shorter-term netback period projects in terms of implementing energy efficiency measures, or just, let's say, stepping into a best available technology, or whether they could put more resources at the moment currently into really supporting more R&D so that they could be in a better position in the longer term. And this balance is very difficult, of course, because it would depend in the regional context. It would depend also, it would be, let's say, even greater for companies that have a global position and they work with, let's say, globally traded commodities, so that they need to decide where to put these efforts in which regions. So this is some of the challenges that many times they basically mention to us that they're facing, and I just wanted to see what were your experience on that front, and also how governments could better cooperate with industries to try to align better both the public and the private goals to this low carbon transition. Thanks.
Thank you. Would you like to take? Yeah, maybe we should take one or two more, sure, and then we can answer. Please, the gentleman on.
Yes, good morning. My name is Andrei Kushlin, and I wanted to ask Andrew and others. Andrew, you talked about the data revolution and what it creates in terms of enabling change, but you mostly focused on kind of on the science part of it, and also a little bit more on accessibility. What's your sense on that now it's the explosion of access to information for a kind of regular guy, this whole social media and shorter news cycles and instantaneous global news cycles. Does this create, where does this create new potential pressure points, not only for the businesses to keep pushing the governments to do more, not to do more, but to do enough, but kind of for the global public opinion in that regard? Where do you see the main new possibilities here? Thank you.
Thank you. Somebody, please.
Thank you. Senator Bear with Personal Cities. You mentioned the action agenda at COP21, and I'm just wondering, what is your wish list? If some certain actions come out of that, I'd love to hear what we should be advocating here in the U.S. for our counterparts that are traveling to COP21 to work toward. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe we can turn to our panelists. You want to start, Hakan?
Sure. The notes will get confusing otherwise. I'll start answering the wrong questions. To answer your question, business finds the pressures of short-term investment, especially in terms of allocating funds to R&D and shorter-term investment reasons. They're always there, believe me, as opposed to longer-term, more sustainable, environmentally friendly, and climate change effective policies. I think there's a little bit of a fallacy there, because if you break it down, you'd probably find that most businesses and their employees, stakeholders, don't really understand what sustainability means. When they say or think that this is going to cost them more money, that indicates to me that they don't really understand that this is actually the only way they can differentiate and gain a competitive advantage for the long term. The first movers will win, it's clear, because it's not easy to understand. It's not easy for employees or customers or suppliers, as you mentioned, the entire supply chain to understand how to implement this. In our own experience, Today we buy 80%, all our plants are platinum certified in terms of energy efficiency. Now, yes, this is nice to have. Most companies maybe aren't aware that actually by doing this you save a huge amount of money. And then 80% of our energy consumption is renewables, purchased renewables. This also, in terms of long-term contracts, is competitive. And soon we'll be installing solar panels on the roofs of our buildings. The key here is finding the right financing, as James mentioned. The financing for projects like this have to be longer term, risk-adjusted, and competitive to help companies finance these kinds of initiatives. I think when that is in place, and governments also incentivize this kind of behavior, because it is much more in the interest of, for example, the Turkish government to invest in one less coal plant than to actually, just regulate more energy or subsidize more energy efficient appliances in the market or more energy efficient factories. I think the policies are there. By working closer and enforcing these policies and then putting in the finance piece, we'll see a big acceleration. And just to tie that into the conference in the coming weeks, I think the most important thing that would come out for me is increased awareness. The whole world needs to really understand that this is no longer just a discussion. This is something that has to be acted on, and it has to be acted on decisively, and it has to be done now. Otherwise, once the point of no return, the question of enough. Are we doing enough? If we don't do enough, then whatever we do is kind of pointless.
James?
If I combine the first and the third question around, the whole investment side and what to get out of COP21, and I'd sort of link it to the thing that keeps me awake at night, and that's and I think Andrew referred to this, the anxiety that we have around a policy uncertainty, and the policy is never certain, but you need to be able to calibrate it as an investor, as a business making those decisions, and you need to be able to put a price on some of that policy risk. And I think if we don't get an element of that policy certainty coming out of Paris, it's going to be really difficult to make those kind of investment decisions that enable us to move forward on some of these technologies or sustainable business plans. So I think that should be top of our wish list in terms of the degree of policy certainty and commitment that comes from all of that. And if I take the data revolution point, which I agree with completely, I think there's a really good example of what's happening in, for example, weather-related businesses here. There's almost a proliferation of these really outstanding analytical weather businesses that take data that's produced by national hydromet offices and translates it into the impact it means for business and people on the ground. And you start to see innovation coming around that as you link it to insurance and the more closed loop of payment around all of that. So some of the African farmers we're now seeing able to insure some of their crops through their mobile phones where they pay their insurance premium, linked back to the weather data that gives them a warning if they are going to face particular types of hazard at any one point of the year, like, for example, El Nino, so they can plan their crops better. And then when storms wipe out some of their crops, the payment can come very quickly directly through the mobile phone again. So you've got a really much more robust and resilient approach to some of that smallholder farming type of thing, which has been unlocked by this data revolution that's coming around the weather side of things.
Well, on the R&D side, I think it's a really good question, and I know IEA's done some really great work on this as well. Look, I think we know, because there's a huge literature now on what it takes to promote which kinds of technologies. We can't predict with definiteness, but we need standards set by government. We need public money for long-term investment, and we don't have anywhere near enough of that. And we need the right kind of partnerships between the government and the private sector. In this country, the DOE, has done an amazingly good job promoting technology. Tesla may not exist today if it weren't for the fact that the Department of Energy actually invested very early on in it. Unfortunately, in this country, it's the cylinder that gets all the news, one failure and massive success elsewhere. But around the world, there needs to be much greater engagement. The good news is that financial markets are starting to get it. I mean, Tesla's a very good example. Everyone knows 1% of the sales of General Motors, and yet half the capital valuation of General Motors. So in other words, financial markets get it. Why do they give such a high value to Tesla? It's because they see that storage capacity is densifying by 7% a year, and it looks like that can continue. That means by 2030, you'll be able to drive 500 miles on one charge of electricity, and the car will cost $30,000. Who will buy an internal combustion engine in $30,000 if you can get that? In other words, there are discontinuities out there that a guy like Jeremy Grantham, you know, who's the great hedge fund manager, that's a multi-billionaire, he's made his career out of the idea of discontinuities. He's someone who says, you know, I mean, the problem with economists is they project, and because, even though they know that history is all about discontinuities, because they can't predict them, they assume them away. And so, therefore, you're always wrong in your projections. And every year, by the way, IEA every year has to sort of up its long-term projections of what renewable energy is. And we've discussed this with Fatih Birol many times. And he says, yeah, but I mean, what's the alternative kind of thing? So it does seem to me that's important. Andre, I mean, it's an interesting question. I mean, I only one comment, which is, look, with new modern social media, everybody knowing everything, being able to get it around, you can't hide anymore. I mean, I think sort of VW illustrates that. I mean, it wasn't EPA that found out about VW, it was an NGO, and my goodness me, I mean, look at it now. It may not survive as a company. That's the largest automobile company in the world, you know, because of criminal action, it cannot hide. And this is a very interesting thing, actually, about data. I mentioned Wilmar before. 47% of all the palm oil in the world is traded by Wilmar. Up until recently, they absolutely have said, look, you know, we'd love to do the right thing, but quite frankly, it's also complicated. You know, we're not going to do it. They now, Mr. Kwok, who runs that, you know, last year came to Davos, and he said, look, I realize now we're in a different world of transparency. You know, we can't hide anymore. Count us in. We're going to change our behavior. And, you know, and I went to see him in Singapore and said, you know, it's great commitment, but you know now we can hold you accountable. We'll actually know whether or not you're honoring that. That's the world in which we live. Just in terms of the action agenda, look, I don't know what the most important, the compact of mayors is incredibly important, I think, because mayors are ahead of their governments, and they're saying, look, we regard carbon emissions as an indicator of economic inefficiency. So we are therefore going to have low carbon cities, not only because we care about climate change, but because we want to be modern, efficient cities. China has 42 low carbon cities. Why do they call them low carbon? Exactly this reason. They want to be modern, technological advanced cities. So that's one. Another would be the energy efficiency, particularly on buildings. I think there could be real breakthroughs on that. Huge opportunities there. I think that restoration of land. You know, last year, 2 billion hectares in the world that used to be forests that now have no value whatsoever. You could restore 350 million hectares of those, and you would actually close the carbon gap, and you'd double farmers' incomes, you'd increase resilience. We know how to do it, and it's starting to happen, but it requires a movement. So the bottom line on this action agenda is partly that each individual thing yields good results, but more important, it encourages ministers and heads of state, when they get on the airplane and go home, to say, wait a minute, there's something here about the future of the world economy that I want to be part of, and I'm going to summon my cabinet, and we're going to move things forward.
With this, first of all, I would like to thank Hakan, James, and Andrew for this great discussion. I think your views and ideas really bring a lot of value to what the World Bank Group and the private sector and other institutions can do. So before we close this session, I would like from each one of you to give me one sentence of a key message that you would like to send. And maybe we can start with you, Hakan.
Thank you. I guess what I would, one sentence, that's hard.
You can make it two.
I think sustainability is no longer a nice to have, it's a business model. a profitable business model.
James?
Think about a decarbonized world, certainly before the end of the century, and think about the huge amount of opportunity that's going to present and what needs to happen from an innovation to implementation cycle and the opportunities that leads for businesses.
Andrew?
If you're a businessman, look at what happens in Paris and realize that this is a small shift which over the next 100 years will radically change the way we produce, the way we consume, the way we live, the way we travel. It will change the world economy fundamentally. You should be part of it.
Thank you. And with this, let us give a round of applause to our panelists.